Hello everyone, my name is Paige Gibbons Backus and I am here at the Williams-Dawe House along with historic interpreter Nate McDonald to give you all a sneak peek and a progress update into the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House. So if you don't know, Prince William County purchased the Williams-Dawe House back in 2022, just in time for the bicentennial of the opening of Brentsville as the county seat. And it is one of the oldest residential structures that the Office of Historic Preservation now preserves here within the town of Brentsville. What we're going to do is we're going to take you on a virtual tour of the inside of the house, and then we're going to come back outside and we're going to tell you a little bit of the restoration work that we have done on the house, as well as the restoration work yet to come.
So here we are in the parlor of the first floor of the Williams-Dawe House. This is perhaps one of the less modified first floor rooms. Until we do a little more exploration, we won't know for sure. But it fits very closely to what a well-sized house of that era would have had on the first floor. Now, part of what kind of confuses the story of modifications and additions to the house over the years is this building may have been used as a tavern at different times in its life, especially in the early period, the first about 20 years or so. Because in about 1824, Jane Williams and Philip Dawe, who are the folks who give us the names for the Williams-Dawe House, moved here from Dumfries. They'd lived there for a number of years, pretty much since childhood, where their father was a silversmith and a businessman in town. They are siblings, not husband and wife, Philip Dawe and Jane Williams. Jane was engaged here in a variety of businesses in town, predominantly tavern keeping, entertaining here, somewhere on this property, on this lot. It may have been in the main house here, it may have been in the outside in a building that's no longer here that Paige mentioned. Inside here, though, this may have been entertaining for just purely the family, or it may have been because of the way the house was broken down. In the early years, Jane had her own family, quite a few kids. Philip married not long after they moved here to Brentsville, brand new town in 1824, and lived here for a few years with his wife, although they had no children. And in later years, Jane lived into her 80s, into the 1860s, and successive generations of her children who had married and had their own families did still live somewhere on this property with her. So the house may have been divided into parts for much longer than we suspect, just because of the way the Williams family used it for so many years. Now, after the 1860s, the family leaves the Williams family originally to Ezra Bauder and his wife, who were from Richmond. He was a music teacher, music instructor, and band leader. Came to Prince William County largely get away from Richmond after the war. Richmond was in a very bad state at the time, and the hopes that they could teach and instruct music here in the community. After they sold the house, after they passed, they went into the hands of Robert and Marion Cooper, we believe. Potentially some hands in between before and after. But the Coopers were living here from the 19-teens up through the 1930s. Robert was a Civil War veteran of the Confederate Army. His wife, Marion, was the son of a prominent family here, the Woodyards, who were Unionists during the war. While Robert died in the 1920s, Marion was still visiting here, although she was no longer living here until she passed away in 1936. And then there was a gap of a number of years, but we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about the Websters and the families who lived here in the latter half of the 20th century. So inside the house here, this room was used in the later years as a library. It is one of the more altered rooms here inside the house, we believe, that it comes from mainly the later years of the home. From the 1940s through the 2000s, and almost the 2010s, this house was still lived in. Now, we talked a little bit about the earlier history of the house, but it didn't just end with the death of the Coopers. The house continued to be lived in. In 1941, it was bought by the Webster family. couple from Alexandria. They moved their family down here and lived here, much like with the Williamses, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews occupied this house up into the 2000s. So it continued. It didn't stay, kind of like Ripon Lodge, it didn't stay trapped in amber. It really did evolve to fit what people wanted. You know, in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 70s, it continues to evolve. It's not just plumbing and electricity, but it is the way people use space. You know, they wanted more shelf space for records and for books. And we can see that in the items that were recovered inside here from this particular room. And to my side here, also we have a dining room. We have some photos that show Webster family Thanksgivings in there. And there's also a kitchen that direction as well, which would not originally have been interior to the house, but likely was added on sometime in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and then modernized generation to generation. So today it has some gas stoves and fittings from the 1970s, 1980s in it. When the house did cease to be occupied after the death of Mrs. Monken, one of Agnes Webster, who bought the house in 1941, one of her daughters-in-law was the last person to live here. That's kind of, the house sat unoccupied for years. The upstairs was damaged, which we'll see in a little bit. And that's kind of when the house began to have more troubles with its structure. Because that's just what happens when a house sits empty, even if it's well maintained, you start to get some problems. But we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So up here in the attic, this is one of the most dramatic preservation efforts that's had to be made in this house so far. Sometime in the 2010s, there was a collapse of the chimney stack here behind me that toppled into the roof of the house and down through the first two floors. The second floor and into the first floor. That damage then allowed moisture, rain, animals, anything pretty much into the whole of the house. So to begin the preservation, really the first effort was to stop that hole. And also to put a new roof on this building to replace the damaged section and also make sure it stayed watertight for the future. So the contractors came in. You can see behind me the work that has been done to the chimney to shore it back up. New old style bricks have been added and then have been covered in protective mortar, which is not Portland cement despite the look. It is a more traditionally correct mortar that will breathe and move with the bricks as it should. But that will hopefully end our problems there with that end of the chimney. But that also then meant that our carpenters from Historic Preservation and Parks and Rec came in to fix the roof section here to my right from having its beams broken by the bricks punching through them, using some salvage lumber from other buildings that have been taken down over the years as a result of development or construction projects where we've been allowed to salvage wood. So that has gone into fixing this house up with correct types of wood and bracing. Other than that, this space was used as any other attic. It was full of furniture and old clothing and hats and all kinds of items and debris when we acquired the property. It is challenging to get up here into the attic. It's a very narrow stairway up, and there are a lot of very large items. But it has been almost entirely emptied of its contents that have been either those that were damaged have been disposed of, and the other items that we can save are awaiting cataloging and addition to our collections. But this space remains one of the more interesting parts of the preservation story in this house.
All right, thank you, Nate, for telling us a little bit of the history here behind the Williams-Dawe House. As you can see here from the back of the house, you can see some of the work that Nate had mentioned on the inside, particularly up in the attic with having to get a new roof. What you see, one of the first things that we had to do here while restoring and stabilizing the property was to fix that hole in the roof and put a new roof on it to prevent future water damage. So what you see there is a metal roof that used to be red if you've driven by the house before it was purchased, but now we've turned it back into a darker brown color because historically in the 1820s, this would have had a wooden shingle roof rather than the metal roof that you see today. But it's keeping the house dry and it's protecting the house from any future damage. What you'll also see here on the back of the house, you can see it a little bit better than in some cases on the other walls of the house. You see the white stucco. Now, local residents call this house the White House because of the color. We're calling it today the Williams-Dawe House because of those first two families that lived here within the house. But you can see some of the remnants of that original stucco that still survives. So while the house was originally made out of brick, the family plastered it over and they scored that stucco to make it look like it was made out of cut stone instead. What we're going to do now is we're going to head around to the side of the house. We're going to learn a little bit about the chimney stabilization that we had to do to the property in order to help fix that hole in the roof and replace the chimney. So when you're driving by the Williams-Dawe House on 619, you'll be able to see on either side of the house one of the other primary focuses of the initial stabilization here of the Williams-Dawe House, and that is with the chimney. Unfortunately, on the other side of the house, one of those chimneys that you see there in the roof line actually collapsed, but the other chimneys had actually become unstable. And so one of the first goals that we had was to stabilize those chimneys in order to ensure that another one did not collapse and provide further damage. And so we had to remortar all of those bricks, do a structural inspection, see what's cracked and what's damaged, and try and do just a basic initial restoration in order to help prevent further damage. Now, if you'll drive by the Williams-Dawe House, these chimneys, because of that, are actually a lot shorter than what they would be historically. And so a future project is to actually completely restore the chimneys to their full height, which is a much more prominent and much more unique architectural feature that you'd see in the house. So in addition to the chimney and the roof stabilization, one of the other focuses that we had here at the Williams-Dawe House was to remove all of the vegetation that was starting to overtake the property. If you had driven by this house 2 years ago, you have hardly been able to see the house, and you would not be able to see the field that I'm currently standing in today, as well as the pile of stones and the chimney back behind me. That's because this field was completely overgrown with bamboo, and the house was starting to be covered in ivy and other overgrowth. And so in order to protect the house, in order to protect the historical resources that are in the ground below us, we had to remove that bamboo forest that was here. And so by cutting that bamboo, we created piles that were taller than me that had to be removed and new grass seed planted and those roots dug up from that bamboo. Because if you know anything about bamboo, it's highly invasive, it spreads quickly, and it's very hard to get rid of. And so at this point in time, we're moving into the next phase of the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House. Our goal is to conduct a phase 1 archaeology in the field that we're standing in today to try and find some of those historical resources that could still be here, including finding a cistern, the privy, the kitchen, the outbuildings, any other information that we can find out here about the house through those archaeological artifacts. In addition to archaeology, our next phase is to do a study of the house itself. So we are going to be conducting architectural and engineering studies in order to determine what we have inside the house, what's stable. In addition to this, we're going to do a historic structures report so we can determine from the inside of the house and the building materials what is older from the 1800s and what is a newer addition, maybe from Agnes Webster's 1941 restoration. We're also conducting more and more research. So we're learning new information every day about who lived here, how this house was used, and the connections of this property here with the town of Brentsville, including finding more information about that chimney and about the pile of stones behind me, which at this point in time we're calling the Wolf-Bowder House because of a couple of the families that we know of who lived there, but that's really it. And so as we continue to do research, as we continue to restore the Williams-Dawe House, we invite you to follow us on social media. We invite you to visit our website at pwcva.gov/history and get involved with the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House. And so as we attend one of our programs to help support the restoration of the Williams-Dawe House and just spread the word so that people know about all of the work that we're doing here and how they can support it. Thank you very much. Come and attend one of our programs.